The candles flickered between us like dying hopes. 23 years of marriage condensed into this moment, this restaurant table that suddenly felt like a courtroom bench. My husband David sat across from me, his hands folded with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. I should have known something was wrong when he suggested Chez Laurent for our anniversary. We'd never been able to afford this place before. The golden lighting, the crystal glasses, the way the waiters moved like choreographed dancers around tables draped in white linen. It was beautiful, too beautiful for us. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, dressed in the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for tonight, having spent an hour perfecting my makeup, believing we were celebrating, believing we were healing whatever had grown cold between us over the past year. David checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. His leg bounced under the table, and I could feel the vibrations through the floor. I reached across the table, my fingers brushing his wrist. "David, what's going on? You seem nervous." He pulled his hand away like I'd burned him. The gesture was so sharp, so deliberate, that other diners glanced our way. Heat crept to my neck. "We need to talk, Sarah." Those 5 words. In 23 years of marriage, I'd learned that those 5 words never preceded good news. They were the harbinger of doctor's appointments about test results, phone calls about his mother's falls, conversations about money we didn't have. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. "I've been thinking about us," he continued, his voice steady in a way that made my stomach clench. "About our marriage. About what I want from the rest of my life." The restaurant noise faded into background static. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of other couples sharing intimate conversations, the soft jazz floating from hidden speakers, it all became white noise against the thundering of my own heartbeat. "David, whatever it is, we can work through it. We always have." He smiled then, but it was the kind of smile that cut. Cold. Practiced. The smile of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. "Actually, Sarah, I don't think we can. Not this time." The front door of the restaurant opened, bringing with it a cool October breeze that made the candle flames dance wildly. I glanced over, more to avoid David's eyes than from any real interest in the new arrivals. My heart stopped. A woman walked in, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made me suddenly conscious of every line around my eyes, every pound I'd gained since my 30s. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and she moved with the grace of someone who never doubted her place in the world. She scanned the restaurant, her eyes finding David immediately. The smile that spread across her face was radiant, intimate, the kind of smile reserved for lovers. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "David," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden roaring in my ears. "David, who is that woman?" But I already knew. Deep in my bones, in that place where wives feel the truth before their minds accept it, I already knew. The woman approached our table, her hand never leaving her belly. 7 months pregnant, maybe 8. The timeline crashed over me like a wave. The late nights at work, the business trips, the way he'd stopped looking at me when we made love, on the rare occasions when we still did. "Hello, darling," she said to David, her voice warm honey over sharp steel. She leaned down and kissed his cheek, her lips lingering there longer than propriety allowed. David's face transformed. The cold mask he'd been wearing for me melted away, replaced by something tender, protective, alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Sarah," David said, his voice carrying the authority of a man making an announcement, "I'd like you to meet Emma. Emma, this is my wife, Sarah." The words hit me like physical blows. The casual introduction. The way he said wife like it was a business relationship he was dissolving. The way Emma's eyes swept over me with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Emma extended her hand to me, and I stared at it like it was a venomous snake. Her engagement ring caught the candlelight. A solitaire diamond, easily 2 carats, set in what looked like platinum. More than David had ever spent on me in our entire marriage. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Sarah. David's told me so much about you." I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely, as if my body was protecting itself from whatever words might try to escape. The restaurant spun around me, the golden light blurring into streaks. David pulled out the empty chair beside him. Emma settled into it gracefully, her hand still protective over her belly. Our table for two had become a table for three, and I was suddenly the intruder at my own anniversary dinner. "Sarah," David said, and his voice was gentle now, the way it used to be when he was trying to explain something complicated. "Emma's having my baby. We're going to be married as soon as our divorce is finalized." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from an extinguished candle. I felt something break inside my chest, not just my heart but something deeper, more fundamental. The foundation of who I thought I was. "How long?" The words scraped out of my throat like broken glass. David and Emma exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications between lovers that I remembered from our early days together. 18 months, Emma said softly, as if kindness in her tone could soften the blade she was twisting. 18 months. While I was planning our 22nd anniversary, he was planning his escape. While I was suggesting marriage counseling, he was falling in love with someone else. While I was trying to save us, he was building a new life without me. "The thing is, Sarah," David continued, cutting methodically through what was left of my world, "Emma and I want to start fresh. Clean slate. And frankly, you're no longer needed in this equation. No longer needed. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of building a life together, of compromise and sacrifice and small daily acts of love. 23 years reduced to those 4 words, you're no longer needed." I looked around the restaurant, wondering if anyone else could see what was happening. If anyone else understood that my entire existence was being dismantled at table 12. But life went on around us. Couples laughed over wine. Waiters served dessert. The jazz played on. "I've already filed the papers," David said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He placed a manila envelope on the table between us, right next to the flickering anniversary candles. "My lawyer says it should be fairly straightforward. We're asking for the house, of course, since we'll be needing the space for the baby. And Emma's job requires her to work from home, so it makes sense. The house. Our house. The one we'd painted together, room by room, over lazy weekends. The one where I'd planted the garden that was just now hitting its stride after 5 years of careful tending. The house that held every memory of our life together. You can keep your car," Emma added helpfully, as if she were doing me a favor. "And David's been very generous with the settlement terms. You should be able to find a nice apartment somewhere." Somewhere. As if I was being relocated, packaged up, and shipped off to make room for the new model. I picked up the envelope with hands that didn't feel like my own. Inside were legal documents filled with words like irreconcilable differences and equitable distribution. My name appeared throughout, but it didn't look like my name anymore. It looked like the name of a stranger, someone whose life was being dissolved on paper. "I need you to understand, Sarah," David said, his voice taking on that patient tone he used when explaining things to clients. "This isn't about spite or anger. It's about being practical. Emma's young, she's fertile, and she makes me happy in a way that I haven't been in years. We can give each other what we need." Young. Fertile. The words cut through me like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating. At 45, I was apparently neither of those things anymore. I was worn out, used up, depleted of whatever David had once found valuable in me. Emma placed her hand over David's on the table, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so natural it made my chest ache. Her diamond caught the light again, throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. "We really do want this to be as painless as possible," she said. "For everyone involved." Painless. As if emotional amputation could be performed with anesthesia. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor, drawing stares from nearby tables. The restaurant tilted around me, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "I need a moment," I managed to say. David nodded, already turning his attention back to Emma, dismissing me like a waitress who'd served her purpose. They began talking quietly, heads bent together in the intimate way that should have been ours. I walked to the ladies' room on unsteady legs, my reflection in the mirror showing a woman I barely recognized. My carefully applied makeup was smudged beneath my eyes. My hair, which I'd styled with such hope just hours before, looked lifeless under the harsh bathroom lighting. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to think, tried to process what had just happened. My husband of 23 years had brought his pregnant mistress to our anniversary dinner to tell me I was no longer needed. It was so bizarre, so cruel, that part of me wondered if I was dreaming. But the legal papers in my hand were real. The diamond on Emma's finger was real. The way David's face had come alive when she walked into the room was real. When I returned to the table, they were sharing dessert. A piece of chocolate cake with 2 forks, feeding each other small bites like newlyweds. The sight of it made bile rise in my throat. "Feeling better?" Emma asked with what might have been genuine concern. I sat down and looked at my husband, really looked at him. When had the lines around his eyes deepened? When had his hair become more silver than brown? When had he stopped being the man who used to leave little notes in my lunch bag? "I'll sign the papers," I said quietly. Relief flooded David's face. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this, Sarah. You always were practical." Practical. Another word that felt like a slap. Not passionate or beautiful or irreplaceable. Practical. "But I have one question," I continued, my voice steadying as something cold and sharp settled in my chest. "Does she know?" David's brow furrowed. "Does she know what?" "About the others." The color drained from David's face. Emma looked between us, confusion replacing her serene confidence. "What others?" Emma asked. I smiled then, and I felt it was probably similar to the smile David had given me earlier. Cold. Sharp. Full of knowledge that cut. "Oh, sweetie," I said, my voice dripping with false sympathy. "You don't think you're the first, do you?" The silence at our table was deafening. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance, but at table 12, the music had stopped. David's hand tightened on his water glass. "Sarah, don't." But I was beyond caring about David's comfort now. The practical wife was done being practical. There was Jennifer from his office 3 years ago. Lasted about 6 months. Then Rebecca, the client, who was going through her own messy divorce. That one lasted almost a year. I turned to Emma, whose perfect composure was finally cracking. "But you probably know about Janet, right? The one from last Christmas? I assumed that ended when you came along, but you never know with David. He's always been good at time management." Emma's hand had dropped from her belly to her lap. Her face was pale now, the radiant glow dimmed. "David," she whispered. David was staring at me with something that might have been respect if it weren't laced with so much hatred. "Those were different," he said finally. "They didn't mean anything." "And what exactly makes Emma different?" I asked. "The pregnancy? Because accidents happen, David. Even to men who are usually so careful." Emma's breathing had become shallow. She looked like she might be sick. "You're lying," she said, but her voice wavered. "David loves me. We're having a baby together." "Oh, I'm sure he does love you," I said, and found that I meant it. Right now. The same way he loved Jennifer. The same way he loved Rebecca. The same way he loved Janet. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a whisper. The same way he loved me, once upon a time. Emma stood up abruptly, her chair clattering backward. Several diners turned to stare as she rushed toward the bathroom, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other protective over her belly. David and I sat in silence for a moment, 23 years of marriage distilled down to this. 2 people who had once loved each other, now wielding their intimate knowledge like weapons. "You didn't have to do that," David said quietly. "Didn't I?" I picked up the legal papers, folding them neatly and slipping them into my purse. "You brought her here, David. To our anniversary dinner. You made her complicit in humiliating me. I just made sure she knew what she was signing up for." David's jaw was tight. "Emma's different. This is different." Maybe it is, I said, standing up and gathering my coat. But history has a way of repeating itself, doesn't it? I left them there, David sitting alone at our anniversary table while his pregnant girlfriend was sick in the bathroom, probably questioning everything she thought she knew about their perfect love story. The October air was sharp against my skin as I stepped outside. For the first time in hours, I could breathe. The legal papers in my purse felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, but somehow I felt lighter than I had in years. I drove home through streets that looked different now, as if the world had shifted on its axis. Our neighborhood, which had felt like home for 15 years, now looked temporary. The house where I'd planned to grow old with David now felt like a way station. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The dishes from breakfast were still in the sink. David's coffee mug sat on the counter, lipstick stained from where I'd kissed him goodbye before work. It seemed impossible that this morning we'd been married, and tonight we were strangers. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room we'd furnished together piece by piece. The couch we'd bought after his promotion. The coffee table I'd found at a garage sale and refinished in the garage. The wedding photos on the mantel, showing two young people who had no idea what the next 23 years would bring. The wine tasted like ashes in my mouth. I must have dozed off on the couch because the sound of knocking jolted me awake. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as I stumbled to the door, my neck stiff from sleeping at an awkward angle. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing on my front porch. She'd changed clothes since dinner, trading her elegant dress for jeans and a sweater that emphasized her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was streaked with tears. For a moment, I considered not answering. What could she possibly want? What could we possibly have to say to each other now? But something in her posture, the way she held herself like she was bracing against a storm, made me turn the deadbolt. "Emma," I said, opening the door but not inviting her in. "It's late." "I know. I'm sorry. I need to talk to you." Up close, without the golden restaurant lighting, she looked younger than I'd initially thought. Maybe 28, maybe 30. Young enough to believe in forever. Old enough to know better. "David doesn't know I'm here," she said quickly, as if that would make a difference to me. "Where is David?" "At his hotel. He's been staying there for the past 2 weeks. While we looked for a house together," she laughed bitterly. "While I looked for a house for us. Apparently, he already had his eye on this 1 inch. I stepped aside, and she walked into my living room like a woman entering her own execution chamber. She looked around, taking in the accumulated evidence of a long marriage, the mismatched furniture, the family photos, the Afghan my mother had crocheted draped over the back of David's recliner. "You have a beautiful home," she said softly. "Thank you, I couldn't manage more than that." The surreal nature of the situation, my husband's pregnant mistress complimenting my home decor at midnight, threatened to break what was left of my composure. Emma settled carefully onto the couch, her hands flowing protectively over her belly. "I need to know if what you said tonight was true." I could have lied. Could have told her I'd made it all up in a moment of spite and rage. Could have let her keep her illusions about David's fidelity and her own special status in his life. Instead, I went to the kitchen and retrieved a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, then remembered her condition and replaced 1 glass with a bottle of water. "How much do you want to know?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Everything." So, I told her everything. About Jennifer, the marketing coordinator, who David had taken to conferences that didn't exist. About Rebecca, whose divorce settlement David had handled in exchange for services that weren't strictly legal. About Janet, the neighbor whose husband traveled for work and who used to sneak through our back gate while I was at my book club. With each name, each detail, Emma seemed to fold in on herself a little more. By the time I finished, she was crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks and dripping onto her sweater. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you asked." "No, I mean, why are you really telling me this? You could have let me find out on my own, after the divorce was final, after David and I were married. Why warn me now?" I considered her question, swirling the wine in my glass and watching the liquid catch the lamplight. Because 23 years ago, I was you. I was young and in love and pregnant, and I thought David hung the moon. If someone had warned me then about what he was capable of, maybe I would have listened. Maybe I would have saved myself decades of feeling like I wasn't enough. Emma's hand moved protectively over her belly. You were pregnant when you married David? 7 months. The confession felt strange on my tongue. We'd never told anyone the real reason for our quick courthouse wedding. We lost the baby 2 weeks before the due date. Stillborn. A little girl we were going to name Catherine. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't spoken Catherine's name out loud in years. David had decreed, in his practical way, that dwelling on what might have been wasn't healthy. We'd buried our daughter and our grief, and pretended that starting over meant forgetting. Emma was staring at me with something that might have been understanding. I'm so sorry. We tried for years after that. Specialists, treatments, procedures that cost more than David's car. Nothing worked. Or rather, nothing worked for me. Apparently David's fertility was never the problem. The irony was sharp enough to cut. All those years of feeling defective, broken, incomplete as a woman, while David secretly proved his virility with a string of other women. Is that why he cheated? Because you couldn't have children? I almost laughed. Oh, honey, no. David cheated because David cheats. It's what he does. Children, no children, young wife, old wife, none of that matters. What matters is that David needs to feel desired, needed, irreplaceable. And that feeling fades, Emma. It always fades. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing what I told her. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the living room before moving on, leaving us in the intimate dimness of the table lamps. What am I supposed to do now? She asked finally. That's not my decision to make. But you have advice. I can see it in your eyes. I did have advice. I had 23 years of advice, of lessons learned the hard way, of warning signs ignored and red flags dismissed as momentary lapses in judgment. Run, I said simply. Pack your things, take your baby, and run as far as you can from David Morrison. Find someone who thinks you hung the moon and never stops looking at you like you're the answer to every question he's ever asked. Emma's laugh was hollow. I can't run. I'm 8 months pregnant with his child. I left my job to be with him. I gave up my apartment, my independence, everything. I don't have anywhere to run to. Do you have family? My parents. In Oregon. But they didn't approve of David, of the affair. They haven't spoken to me since I told them about the baby. Pride heals faster than a broken heart, I said. Trust me on that one. Emma was quiet for another long moment, her hands moving in slow circles over her belly. When she looked up at me, her eyes were clearer, more determined. He really loved you once, didn't he? David, I mean, at the beginning. I thought so. And maybe he did, in his way. But David's love has conditions, terms, and clauses that can be revoked without notice. You'll spend your whole marriage trying to meet requirements that keep changing, trying to be the woman he fell in love with while becoming someone you don't recognize. Is that what happened to you? I thought about the woman I'd been at 22. Fearless, opinionated, quick to laugh, and slow to forgive. Somewhere along the way, that woman had been worn down to nothing, eroded by decades of small compromises and daily disappointments. I lost myself trying to keep David happy. Don't make the same mistake. Emma stood up, moving carefully with the weight of late pregnancy. Thank you for telling me the truth, for not lying to protect him or yourself. Emma, I called as she reached the door. Whatever you decide to do, decide for yourself and your baby. Don't decide based on what David wants or what you think you owe him. You don't owe him anything. She nodded and stepped into the night, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my marriage and something that might have been hope. I didn't see or hear from either of them for 2 weeks. The divorce papers sat on my kitchen counter and signed, while I consulted with lawyers and tried to figure out how to rebuild a life I'd never imagined living alone. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for work. Emma's name appeared on my caller ID, and I almost didn't answer. What more could we possibly have to say to each other? Sarah? Her voice was strained, exhausted. I'm in labor. Emma, why are you calling me? Where's David? David's not here. He's in Chicago on business. He said the baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks, and that this client meeting was too important to miss. She paused, breathing heavily. I'm at Mercy General. I don't have anyone else to call. The hospital was a 15-minute drive that I made in 10. I found Emma in the maternity ward, alone in a room that smelled like disinfectant and fear. She was hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily, tracking her contractions and the baby's heartbeat. You came, she said when she saw me, and the relief in her voice was heartbreaking. Of course I came. I stayed with her through 8 hours of labor. I held her hand during contractions, argued with nurses about pain medication, and called her parents in Oregon to tell them their granddaughter was being born. David arrived 2 hours after his daughter was born, rushing into the room with flowers and apologies and explanations about delayed flights and missed connections. He stopped short when he saw me sitting beside Emma's bed, holding his newborn daughter. Sarah? What are you doing here? Emma called me, I said simply, not bothering to explain why she'd called me instead of him, why she'd been alone when their daughter decided to make her early appearance. The baby was perfect. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of wrinkled pink perfection with David's dark hair and her mother's delicate features. Looking at her, I felt an ache so deep it took my breath away. This could have been Catherine, should have been Catherine, if life had been different. We're naming her Sarah, Emma said quietly, her eyes fixed on David's face. After the woman who was there when I needed her most. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He understood the message, the quiet rebuke embedded in his daughter's name. That's very thoughtful, he managed. I placed the baby in Emma's arms and gathered my things. The intimate family moment wasn't mine to share, and I'd done what I came to do. Congratulations, I said to both of them. She's beautiful. Emma caught my hand as I turned to leave. Thank you. For everything. I squeezed her fingers gently and left them to begin their new life together. 6 months later, Emma showed up at my new apartment with baby Sarah in a carrier and divorce papers in her hand. You were right, she said simply. About everything. It turned out that David's respect for fatherhood lasted exactly as long as his patience for sleepless nights and a partner whose attention was divided. Emma had caught him with his secretary 3 weeks earlier, and this time she hadn't waited around for explanations or promises to change. I called my parents, she said, settling into my kitchen while I made tea, and her daughter slept peacefully in her carrier. They're expecting us tomorrow. They want to meet their granddaughter. That's wonderful, Emma. You're doing the right thing. I know. She pulled out legal documents remarkably similar to the ones David had served me a year earlier. I wanted you to know that I fought for the house. Our house. I guess it is now. David can't afford to keep it and pay child support and alimony. My lawyer says you should be able to buy it back for about half what it's worth now. The house. My garden. My life. Returned to me like a gift I'd never expected to receive again. Emma, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just promise me something. What? When David comes calling, and he will come calling, don't let him back in. He'll be charming and apologetic and full of promises. He'll tell you he's learned his lesson, that he knows what he lost. Don't believe him. I looked at this young woman who'd learned in 18 months what it had taken me 23 years to understand. I promise. Emma smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since that night at the restaurant. Good. Sarah deserves better. We all deserve better. After they left for Oregon, I drove to the house that had been my home for so long. The key still fit the lock, though everything inside had been changed. David had removed all traces of our life together, replacing our accumulated memories with furniture that looked like it belonged in a hotel. But the bones of the house were the same. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. The living room where we'd watched countless movies. The bedroom where we'd slept and fought and made love and grown apart. I walked out to the backyard and found my garden overgrown but alive. The rose bushes I'd planted were heavy with blooms. The herbs had gone to seed, but were still fragrant when I brushed my hands through them. Like me, they'd survived the neglect and were ready to flourish again with a little care. Standing there in the garden I'd created with my own hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The quiet satisfaction of a woman who'd walked through fire and emerged with her essential self intact. My phone buzzed with a text message. David's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my heart stuttered with old habits of anxiety and anticipation. The message was short. "Can we talk?" I stared at the words for a long time, remembering Emma's warning, remembering the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. Finally, I typed back a single word. No. Then I deleted his contact information and blocked his number. The house keys felt solid and familiar in my hand as I unlocked the front door and stepped back into the life I'd thought I'd lost forever. There was work to do, walls to repaint, furniture to buy, a garden to restore, a life to rebuild from the ground up. But I had time. I had peace. And for the first time in decades, I had the unshakable knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged, answerable to no one but myself. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows I'd once shared with David, but now the light was entirely my own.